Okay. Omagyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitanyena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So yesterday was a very auspicious day. It was Guru Purnima. It was the beginning of chaturmasya, right? This 4-month period that was especially followed in Vedic India by sannyasis, traveling sannyasis, during the monsoon season. And it's said to be a time when Lord Vishnu is in some special type of divine slumber. And it also coincides with the monsoon season, so very heavy rain. And so the sannyasis, they would remain in one place. Normally they'd be traveling, but during that period of 4 months, they would remain in one place and focus on some quite austere practices, eating more simply, living more simply. And in our lineage, at least what we've seen from our gurus, they've not put so much emphasis on it. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he did actually. Saraswati Thakur did, and I feel he did that in order to demonstrate the validity of what he was doing, because he was dealing with he was dealing with a society that put importance on these things, strict practices of austerity and so on. I've heard Saraswati, like one of the things that they do, I've heard Saraswati Thakur used to do, is eating off of the floor, like with his mouth. And I think it was also limited, like how many mouthfuls that you could eat, like very extreme things. And Saraswati Thakur, I believe he followed that because he had to prove something actually, because he was doing something very different, and he had many critics, and he had to show we're serious people, we can keep up with everyone else. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he actually made the point that this is one reason why the Goswamis of Vrindavan lived the lives that they did, because they live these strict lives of renunciation. They don't need to, actually. The Vaishnava, they don't need to live like that. They have a relationship with Krishna. They're automatically just thinking of Krishna in relation to everything they do. They have no personal interest. So whether they're moving in the midst of opulence and luxury and wealth, or they're living in extreme austerity, it's actually the same for them. So they're not bound to live these highly renounced lives. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj made this interesting point that one reason that they did is because that was what the society expected of renunciates. And if they lived lives that were kind of more involved with the world, using the facilities of the world, then people may criticize them, may criticize Mahaprabhu's movement. So they had to show, and especially because, the Mayavadis, those of the impersonalist school, they were persons who, in particular, oh wow, Gangalila, Dandavat Gangalila, great to see you, Vivo. So the impersonalists, those of the Mayavad school, they were persons in particular who critiqued Mahaprabhu's movement, and we see that in the case of Prakashananda Saraswati. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are these different examples. Prakashananda Saraswati and his followers, Sarvabhaumas, Bhattacharya's, always affectionate with Mahaprabhu, but in the beginning is concerned about his belief system and the way that he lives. Of course, ultimately they're all converted by Mahaprabhu, but we see in the beginning that that was the mindset, right, of the impersonalist school. So the impersonalist school was critical of Mahaprabhu's movement of divine love, and they put a lot of emphasis on renunciation and austerity, and and so in order to be taken seriously, Mahaprabhu's followers had to show our belief system may be a little different, but we can also do austerity. It's not like this whole emotional movement of love and kirtan is an excuse to not have to do the hard stuff. Like we can do that too if that's what you need. And so the Goswamis, we hear Srila Sridhar Maharaj explain that was one reason why they lived these lives of extreme renunciation. And of course, from another angle, they're also demonstrating that um, we don't need anything of this world, and that the soul in its pure state is fully satisfied, fully fulfilled in connection with the Lord, doesn't need any luxury from this world. So there's also an example to be taken from that, right? And in general, our principle is simple living, high thinking. And so the Goswamis demonstrated that to the most extreme degree. Um, so, sorry, it's a little noisy out here, a little distracting. Um, what was I saying? We were talking about Mahaprabhu's. I can't remember how we started. Nand, you're usually good at remembering.
Um, well, we started with, yesterday was Guru Purnima, and you started explaining the significance of
Chaturmasya.
chaturmasya.
Okay,
And
thank you.
I
Thank you.
wanted to ask, I didn't really catch specifically why uh how long is chaturmasya? 4 months, you
Yeah,
said?
yeah, literally, Chatur is 4,
Oh,
Masya
right,
is
chatur.
months. So yeah, it means 4 months. Yeah.
And why is there more austerity during this month? Why do we observe more austerity?
Well, there's there's different conceptions around that. Um, it and I don't have I mean honestly I don't have a clear understanding. I haven't fully researched it. I haven't heard it clearly explained by our gurus. But it's I mean it would be easy to find out. It's a major thing in the Vedic tradition. But my understanding is more or less that Vishnu's in, they say he's sleeping. He's in this divine rest during this time. Um, and so it's like a way of honoring him. Um, and also, I think a part of it too is because, normally the sannyasis are traveling. And then because of the rainy season, it's also just not practical to travel so much. But then like to compensate for that level of austerity that is encountered in traveling, then they're doing some extra austerity in the one place where they're staying. Um, but yeah, I don't know if anyone else can illuminate. Maybe someone else can offer some more explanation
It
about
was interesting because this morning, while we were reading Chaitanya Bhagavat, we were reading the glories of Haridas Thakur, and there was mentioned how, a specific group of people, different Brahmins, were criticizing this movement of Sankirtan.
it. Okay. Okay.
And in one of their dialogues, they mention even when the Lord is taking rest, they are still loudly chanting, and
Mm,
it could awake him, and this would disturb him so much, and they're still chanting during that time. So I,
yeah.
I didn't understand what that really meant, but now it's making sense. Like, okay, this is
Yeah.
pointing towards the chaturmasya.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's pretty amazing. You just read that this morning. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's
there's
just
yeah, I mean, as I said, this is like a traditional Vedic conception. It's not something super relevant to our Vaishnava cultivation. And yeah, as you've described, there is this idea the Lord is resting, and we shouldn't disturb him. Um, the other day, Sudarshan Prabhu, he actually did do some research and he mentioned there are other explanations that are given by Vaishnava acharyas, and I think one of them he mentioned was something quite profound, that the Lord's actually experiencing this deep state of love and separation, and he's just like absorbed in this trance. So there are different angles on it, but again, it's not something super essential for those who are following the Vaishnava school. Did you raise your hand again? Or is that from before? Oh, Ganga Lila. Okay.
No, just a very tiny side remark, nothing deep over here. What I understood about it before was that it is very close to just the fact that it is monsoon season in India, and we are not under that spell. Like, so
Hmm. Hmm.
that, like the food there were so many foods you can't eat because it wasn't produced because it's in that time, none of that grows. And I think that has a lot to do with it also.
Mm.
That's what
Yeah,
I read.
yeah, yeah. I think
That
there's
we
like
don't
an
have to be
inter.
worried too much about it because we don't have monsoon over here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an interweaving of these two aspects, that the fact that it is the monsoon, that is very much a part of it too. But there definitely is an aspect of abstaining, of abstinence,
Yeah.
and not eating certain foods, which are, very.
Like sag.
What did you say?
Sag, I think, is one of them.
Tog?
Sag,
Oh,
green.
Sag,
right,
Sag,
shock, right.
Finnish,
Yeah, yeah.
sag, sag.
Some people say sag. Yeah, we
Yeah,
say,
sag.
yeah. Yeah, there's some greens that we won't take in 1 month. I think 1 month is no yogurt. Um, different things
milk,
like this.
yeah, milk also. No milk.
Milk in 1 month. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
different in each of the months.
And
Um,
when does Vishnu wake up again? Right after
well,
4 months?
it's the end of Kartik, so that Kartik is
Oh,
the fourth
okay.
month, and so it can the
That
chaturmasya
that
period
puts it
concludes,
together for me.
yeah,
Thank you.
with the Kartik period. Um, so as I said, right, we've seen Saraswati Thakur, he observed this, and I believe that was largely for societal reasons. But what we saw with our Gurudev and also Param Guru Maharaj, and we know Srila Sridhar Maharaj actually had a very strict nature, so I find it quite significant that he didn't pay so much attention to these observances, and some level, like a token level. I came across one talk of Srila Sridhar Maharaj where someone was actually asking him about this point, and I believe it was someone coming from ISKCON, a Western devotee, saying, you know, I'm seeing here in your mat that you're not so strictly following all of these things, like not eating this and this month and all these things. And so he asked Srila Sridhar Maharaj, why is that? And Srila Sridhar Maharaj said, he quoted a verse from Prahlad Maharaj in the Bhagavatam, saying that the whole conclusion of the Vedas is Swatmarpanam, right? Self-giving. So that, I believe the verse is saying, that the Vedas are dealing with the Vedas are dealing with many matters. The Vedic texts are dealing with many matters, and they're aimed at persons of many different mentalities. But the real conclusion and essence of their message is to give oneself, right? To surrender to the Lord. And all of the things that they're suggesting are working towards that end of coming to a point of surrender, self-giving. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj made the point, like if one has already understood this essential truth, that if one has already understood this conclusion of the Veda, that we are to give ourselves to the Lord wholesale, Srila Sridhar Maharaj said, if we have understood that, then it becomes less necessary to follow some of these secondary concerns, right? Some of these prohibitions or injunctions that are not directly related to that central principle. Like if you've already come to that point, then other things that were previously meant to help bring you there, they become less important, right? Our Gurudev, he made this one interesting point. It's published in Revealed Truth, where he says 90% of the Vedic rulings are to simply promote respect, right? Because if we don't have love, if we don't have love for the Lord, then at least we can honor and respect the Lord, and by doing that we can gradually come to a point of love, right? So many of these things that we follow, like this day we do that, and the Kaddishi we do that, and they're just helping us to kind of remember the Lord, right, and live our lives centered around him, and we're cultivating this mood of honor and respect. But the idea is that will bring us to a point of love, and once we reach that point of love, then many of those rulings, they become irrelevant, right? So this was Srila Sridhar Maharaj's point, that we're already cultivating that central thing, Sharanagati, Swatmarpanam, surrender. And so then these other things, they become less important. But then Kartik, so the Kartik is the last month in this 4-month period, and that month is a period that we would honor, that our Gurudev Param Guru Maharaj did honor in a very serious way, because that month is also the month of Radharani. That month is Srimati Radharani is represented in that month, and so that month has another dimension to it. Pertaining more to the nirguna plane, right? The transcendental plane, the eternal current towards the center. And so that last month of Kartik is a period that we would observe more seriously. We did observe more serious level of austerity in that month in the Mat. And as many of you know, we had many songs and special prayers that we would chant at that time, which we don't at other times of the year. So anyhow, this period of chaturmasya is beginning now. So that was one special point about yesterday. Also, it was the disappearance day, the Tirobhav Titi of Srila Sanatan Goswami, who is so important to us. Sanatan Goswami, he is one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. He is known as the Acharya of Sambandha Gyan, right? Sambandha Gyan, that knowledge pertaining to what is what, having a proper acquaintance with the environment as it is sometimes expressed. That is Sambandha Gyan. And so Sanatan Goswami has most clearly represented that knowledge to us. And in fact, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's one discussion that takes place over a 2-month period between Mahaprabhu and Sanatan Goswami. Welcome, Jagannath Priya. Great to have you with us today. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's a record. I mean, it's pretty cool, like these Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's it's a spiritual, philosophical. Oh, Braja Mohini's there too. Wow, Dandavat. Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's a philosophical and spiritual representation of Mahaprabhu, his teachings, his movement, his pastimes. But it's also a historical record, from one perspective, And generally, generally we put less importance on history and chronology and all these things because we're interested more on the essence. But still, from our human point of view, it's also a cool angle of vision. Like Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he once referred to some of the associates of Mahaprabhu as eyewitnesses. Welcome, Rishabhanavi. Great to have you with us. Srila Sridhar Maharaj referred to them as eyewitnesses. Like they were eyewitnesses of Mahaprabhu's pastimes. And which I find helpful from our human standpoint, because it's like just brings it home, like these are things that really happened, and 500 years ago is not that long, actually. So like there was an actual like living conversation that took place between Mahaprabhu and Sanatan Goswami, and it took place in Varanasi, or Benares, whoever you want to call it. Over a 2-month period. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary, daily meeting and discussing these subject matters. And it all started with this one question, Ke Ami? Who am I? Right? Who am I? And Sanatana Goswami's actually asking on behalf of ourselves, right? Who am I? He says, why am I suffering? What is the real goal? And like this, there were 5 questions, which I don't know if I can remember in this moment. Who am I? Why am I suffering? What is the real goal? What is the path along those lines? And so these like very essential, fundamental questions that every man, woman, child should be asking. Any being with any sentient consciousness should be asking these questions before anything else. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the real purpose of life, right? So Sanatan Goswami is mercifully posing these questions on behalf of ourselves. And all of these questions, they're all pertaining to Sambandha Gyan, right? Proper understanding of the nature of things, proper understanding of the nature of ourself and the environment. So this is Sambandha Gyan. This is why Sanatan Goswami is known as the Acharya, the preceptor of Sambandha Gyan. And then Mahaprabhu begins the discussion with this famous verse, which I think everyone here knows, Jiver Srupa Hoy Krishner Nityadas. Krishner Tatasta Shakti Beda Bed Prakash, right? That what is the living entity? Who are we actually intrinsically in Swarup form? Krishna Das, Nitya, eternally Krishna's servants. We are all loving servitors of God. That is our real identity. And so in that opening of the conversation, like 1,000,001 questions are answered. And so then this goes on for 2 months, and there's discussion of the nature of the material energy, the nature and the different divisions of this material energy. There's discussion of the nature of the spiritual energy, different divisions of the spiritual energy. And it's a very elaborate, systematic conversation, philosophical conversation that takes place between Mahaprabhu and Sanatan Goswami. And there are so many wonderful pastimes of Sanatan Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Sanatan Goswami, he had a very humble nature, like Rupa Goswami also. But he was also very clever. He was a brilliant diplomat and politician, we can also say. He worked for the Nawab. He was forcefully recruited by the Nawab Hussein Shah, the Muslim ruler at that time, right? Because India was largely under the Mughal occupation at the time. And so Sanatana Goswami was forcefully recruited by him because he was so brilliant, and as was his brother Rupa, right? Rupa Goswami. And so I believe Rupa Goswami was the prime minister, and Sanatan, I think, was the prime minister, Rupa the finance minister, but it might have been the other way around. If anybody knows, please correct me. And Sanatan was, funnily enough, actually very dear to this Nawab. He like to the point where it was really hard for him to quit. And it wasn't only that he was good at his job. This Nawab, I mean, he was actually a horrible man. He destroyed so many temples, but he actually had affection for Sanatan Goswami. There was some, this is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, and to the point where it made it really difficult for him to quit. It was easier for Rupa Goswami. Rupa Goswami was able to make some excuse. He retired, had like a generous payout, and that's also described. Chaitanya Charitamrita is so practical too. It describes like how they managed their money, how they divided their funds, and they gave some money away, they kept some money for emergencies, and all these things are described. But anyhow, Sanatan Goswami, he was not able to quit so easily because the Nawab really depended on him and had real affection for him. And so he had to orchestrate this whole scenario in order to make the Nawab angry at him, and put him into prison as punishment. I won't go into all the details because it would take too long, and many of you are familiar with these stories. But anyhow, so Sanatan ends up in prison after getting himself into trouble deliberately. Then he bribes his way out of prison, in a very clever and diplomatic way, um, and has a harrowing escape, um, off the beaten track, like as a fugitive from the government, narrowly escapes death, and finally appears on Mahaprabhu's doorstep in Varanasi. And it's an extraordinary meeting, very beautiful meeting. And as you can imagine, he's a mess, right? This is over a period of, I would presume, maybe a few months, from being in prison to traveling through dangerous terrain. Could have been a few months, at least several weeks. So you can imagine he's a complete mess. He's dirty, he's disheveled. He also has a long beard, because he was associating so closely with the Muslim rulers. Then he also, was expected to adopt the dress and appearance of the Muslims, and so he had a long beard, ragged cloth, not so clean. And he shows up in this like very desperate kind of way in front of Mahaprabhu at his doorstep in um in Varanasi. And I think Mahaprabhu was staying at the home of Chandrasekhar Acharya. I believe it was Chandrasekhar Acharya in Varanasi. And so Sanatan Goswami arrives, and characteristically, right, he's, oh, beautiful. Thank you, Ananda Krishna. Yeah, it's a beautiful painting. Very nice. Although I expect that painting is not wholly accurate, not a wholly accurate description, because I think Sanatan didn't look quite as neat and tidy as that. But anyhow, it's a beautiful depiction. So Sanatan, so humble, feeling shy, and so he just sat outside the door, Chandrasekhar's home. And Mahaprabhu, of course, he can sense his presence, and no doubt he's been waiting for him. And so Mahaprabhu says to Chandrasekhar, "Oh, can you check? Is there someone outside?" And oh, I think what he actually said was, "Is there a Vaishnava at the door?" Right? That's right. That's how he said, "Is there a Vaishnava at the door?" And so Chandrasekhar went and looked out, and he sees this ragged looking Muslim, outside his door, and he's looking for the Vaishnava, doesn't see him. So he goes back inside and tells Mahaprabhu, "No, there's no Vaishnava at the door." And then Mahaprabhu says, "Well, is there anyone there?" And Chandrasekhar said, "Yeah, there's this old Muslim, not old, but raggedy looking fakir out there." And Mahaprabhu says, "Bring him in," and so they meet, and you can get a sense of Chandrasekhar's surprise, looking at them there. Mahaprabhu, Sanatan, they're immediately embracing in divine love, and Sanatan's actually very shy, shrinking away, feeling very dirty, very unfit to be touched by his beloved Lord. But Mahaprabhu is pulling him closer, forcefully embracing him. And there's some beautiful verses there, Sanata saying, "Don't touch me," and Mahaprabhu saying, "You are so pure, you could purify all the worlds." And Toma Deki, Toma Sparshi, Gai Tomar Gun. Mahaprabhu says to see you, to touch you, to sing your glories, your qualities. This is the real fulfillment of the senses, right? To embrace you is the fulfillment of the sense of touch. To speak your good qualities is the fulfillment of our speech, right? To see you is the fulfillment of our eyes. This is the real purpose of this is what our senses are actually for, to have association with the Vaishnavas and loving exchanges with the Vaishnavas. And so they have this wonderful meeting, And then Mahaprabhu sends him, for a bath and a shave and fresh cloth and and so on. And then they have 2 months of instruction, meeting every day. And Mahaprabhu posts him in Vrindavan, right? So Rupa and Sanatan, they're both posted in Vrindavan. And then later Jiva Goswami, their nephew, comes, and like this, the 6 Goswamis began to form, to congregate. And so many other, there are really a number of very beautiful pastimes with Sanatan Goswami and Charitamrita. Another one that's very touching is when Sanatan Goswami goes to visit Mahaprabhu in Puri at one time. But on the way, he makes some contact with contaminated water, and so he develops all these sores over his body. And so he has these, when he reaches Puri, he's traveled all the way from Vrindavan to Puri by foot, walking through jungles and all kinds of places, and hazardous journey. And so when he reaches Puri, he literally has these horrible oozing sores coming out of his body, and Mahaprabhu naturally wants to embrace him, right? And Sanata's pushing him back, right? No, don't touch me, my Lord. I'm so filthy. And again, Mahaprabhu's forcefully embracing him, and this would go on day after day. They'd meet every day. Mahaprabhu would embrace him, and sometimes the pus from Sanatan's sores would smear on Mahaprabhu's body. And so Sanatan was just feeling more and more terrible about this situation. But Mahaprabhu was oblivious to it. And finally, Sanatan Goswami felt so bad that he decided to end his life. Like he could not take it anymore. This was how bad he was feeling. So he decided to end his life. He had a whole plan. He was going to throw his body under the Rath cart, right, during the Rath Yatra of Lord Jagannath. Had it all planned out. Of course, Mahaprabhu knows what's up. And so he approaches him before the day, and he says, "Oh, Sanatan, what are you thinking?" He says, your body does not belong to you, right? Your body belongs to me. Sorry, 1 second, I have to grab a tissue. He says, you are my property. Who are you to destroy another person's property? And Haridas Thakur happens to be there. Mahaprabhu says, "Oh, Haridas, what do you think of this? This Sanatan, he wants to destroy someone else's property. What is this about?" And then he explains to him, there's so much that I need to do. I have such an important mission, but I'm one person. I can't do it alone. I need your help, Sanatan. There's so much that I need for you to do. And so it's a very beautiful instruction, right? Very beautiful message, and it's one to contemplate, right? That, how do we justify giving so much attention to our own upkeep, our own maintenance and care and nourishment from this perspective, right? That we belong to the Lord, and we are beloved to the Lord and to Guru and Vaishnava, and for their happiness, this is the Vaishnava adjustment, because everything becomes Krishna-centered, right? So because my Lord loves me, because my Guru loves me, because the Vaishnavas love me, I have some duty to take care of myself. And we may also think, and I have some service to do, right? I have some service to do. Rai Kishori shared this beautiful expression she heard from Gurudev. As long as my heart is beating and I have air in my lungs, then I think Krishna wants to take some service from me. So beautiful, and very, very characteristic of Srila Govinda Maharaj, exactly the kind of thing that he would say. So very beautiful teaching there. So Sanatan Goswami. So then then ultimately Sanatan Goswami goes on, right, to write all of these books, important books, for our Vaishnava life. Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which is very important text describing the gradation in devotion. Hari Bhakti Vilas, which is also like a kind of rule book for the Vaishnavas, is also an important text, and others. So he has made very important contribution for us. And Sanatan Goswami was very beloved to all the Vaishnavas in Vrindavan. This is another beautiful thing to remember about him, that he, normally the sannyasis or babajis, they would remain aloof from family matters, right? This is the general recommendation. But Sanatan Goswami was something of an exception, right? He became like a father figure, uncle for almost all the residents of Vrindavan. And we hear that, sometimes the Brajabasis would even come to him with their like family matters and he would help resolve them. And I think it was Bodo, I can't remember. They had a name they used to call him. I can't remember what it was. It was something like father, uncle, or Gurudev mentioned it. And when he passed away, and we're honoring that day today, it said that all the men of Vrindavan, they shaved their heads. And normally this is something that would be observed when one's father dies. But they all had that type of feeling for Sanatan Goswami. And so they all shaved their heads and followed these observances, one follows when one's father passes. And that was in Govardhan, and near to Govardhan, actually near to where our mat is, I believe. There's his Bhajan Kutir is there, near to Manasi Ganga, if I'm not mistaken. And there was this like huge procession, carrying his divine form after he had passed, with all the residents coming out. One other story I'm remembering, which many of you know, but it is such a beautiful pastime to remember, and really shows the level of devotion that Sanatan Goswami had, that we hear on this one occasion. Rupa Goswami, he invited Sanatan. And Sanatan Goswami is in some ways a guru to Rupa Goswami. It's an interesting thing because we consider Rupa Goswami the head of our lineage. We are the Rupa Nuga Sampradaya, followers of Rupa. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj has mentioned even Sanatan Goswami, he expressed some aspiration to be a Rupa Nuga. But at the same time, Sanatan Goswami was the elder brother of Rupa, and he had a position of guru in many ways to Rupa too, and may even have given Rupa Goswami Diksha. That I'm not sure of, but I believe I've heard that may be possible. So Sanatan Goswami had a guru position for Rupa Goswami. And so there was an occasion Rupa Goswami, wants to offer some service to his beloved brother and guru. And so he invited Sanatan for lunch. And Rupa Goswami particularly wanted to make some sweet rice for his brother, but he didn't have anything, and so he's thinking, what to do. And then unexpectedly, there was one very beautiful young girl. She came with these premium ingredients, the finest milk, finest rice, finest sugar. And so Rupa Goswami happily received that, and he prepared this wonderful sweet rice for Sanatan Goswami. Sanatan Goswami came, he honored the prasad and the sweet rice, and but when he tasted that sweet rice, he could understand this was something supernatural. This was not something of this world. And so Sanatan inquired from Rupa, how did you make this sweet rice? Where did you get these ingredients from? And Rupa Goswami, he said, oh, there was this young girl, very beautiful young girl. She came And she brought these ingredients. And so I used these to prepare this for you. And Sanatan Goswami is trying to think, who is this girl? Because as I mentioned, Sanatan had this unique relationship with the residents of Vrindavan. And so he's asking more like, where did she come from? What did she look like? And Sanatan's thinking, because he knows everyone, he's thinking this person, that person, who could it be? He came to the conclusion that this was not any of the current, residents of Vrindavan, but this was Srimati Radharani herself, who had come and personally supplied these ingredients. And one would think that he would be happy about this. Oh, what a blessing. But Sanatan Goswami's devotion is of such a high order that he actually became very unhappy about that. He became disturbed, and he expressed to Rupa, we want to offer service to her. Like our whole life's operation is to render the least service for her divine grace. But now she has come and offered service to us. This is a terrible thing, And he chastised Rupa about this. He was very unhappy about this. And Gurudev mentioned also his body, like he was feeling this such intense emotion. His body changed color. I think Rupa and Sanatan, they were both feeling this intense divine emotion. And so it is an extraordinary thing. This is the such high level of devotion. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, there's Vishabhanavi Dandavat. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he actually made some comparison, mentioning, there are other Vaishnavas who are very exalted, and we can look at the example of Madhavendra Puri. Srila Sridhar Maharaj mentioned, he received a similar blessing from Krishna himself. And Madhavendra Puri was appreciating that, and that is, Madhavendra Puri, what a high level of devotion to invite so that the Lord himself is compelled to come and personally offer prasad. That is an extraordinary thing and a wonderful thing. That is already inconceivably high, right, within the world of devotion. But Sanatan Goswami is at an even higher level. Srila Sridhar Maharaj says that he is, although his devotion is so intense that he attracts Radharani herself to come and offer something to him, his devotion is so inconceivably exalted that he is unhappy to receive that, because he wants to give to her, And it reminds us of the posture of Srimati Radharani. This is her mood, actually, right? On the altar, where she is in our temples, she is in the posture of holding a garland in service to Krishna, right? She is so deeply fixed in that mood of offering that she is holding that posture, not wanting to receive a drop of service for herself, not wanting to receive a garland for herself, but she wants to hold that in service to Krishna. So, these things are so high and so far from us, actually, but at least to be able to hear them, to contemplate this type of devotion, to worship this type of devotion, this is it's such a blessing for us. It is, the distance is so far, right? And somehow we have the privilege of being able to hear about these great, great devotees and their mood of devotion. So that is something about Sanatan Goswami. Last night in our program here, we didn't get a chance to talk about Sanatan Goswami, so I was feeling to talk about him today. Then yesterday was also the appearance day. It's also coinciding with the appearance day of Vedavyas, right? Vedavyas, who is the great sage, right, who compiled all of the Vedic texts for the benefit of humanity at large, and ultimately gave us the great gift of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is granting the the gift of devotion, prema bhakti to Sri Krishna, the most original form of divinity. So we're also honoring Vedavyas, and then because we see Guru as representative of Vedavyas, right? Guru is seen in one aspect as, holding that post of Vedavyas in terms of, conveying divine knowledge to us. And so we also honor Guru as Vyasadeva. And so therefore, this day is also a day to honor our own Guru. And so my experience with our Gurudev, Srila Govinda Maharaj, is that was his focus on that day of Guru Purnima. It was an opportunity for him to sing the glories of his beloved Guru Maharaj. And so in our program last night, trying to follow in Gurudev's footsteps and following his inspiration, we talked in our program last night mostly about our Gurudev, remembering something of his life, of his extraordinary life. Our Gurudev's life is an extraordinary and somewhat unique example of a whole life of surrender and a whole life of also closeness to Guru, living in the proximity of Guru, because Srila Govinda Maharaj, he joined his Guru Maharaj's mission at such a young age. He was a teenager, 17 years old. And he showed this beautiful example of wholesale surrender at such a young age and remained in service to his Guru up until his last breath in this world, right? As we expressed earlier, right? As he said, as long as I have air in my lungs and my heart is beating, I know I have some service, and he lived that. He lived that. Our Gurudev, he had such a presence that even those who do not believe, they believe. We had that meeting with Lalita Madhava Prabhu a few days ago, and our Gurudev in Lalita Madhava, he worked so hard in that presentation. It was so wonderful, and if anyone missed it, please watch it. It is I've been through it again myself, and I would like to go through it again. It's so nice, and he put so much time into preparing it, collecting all these archived Bengali excerpts from magazines, books, but he found in the early Gaudiya Darshan, the Gaudiya Darshan magazine, it was the monthly magazine of our Mat that our Gurudev published. And Lalita Madhava found in some of the early editions advertisements that Gurudev wrote promoting this book, Paramartha Dharma Nirnoy, that he published, primarily focusing on this excerpt of the writings of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. But in one of these, the advertisements were really cool. Gurudev wrote some cool stuff. We came across one too when I was living in Navadip. We came across one. It was like a leaflet that Gurudev had written, and it was and like the header on this leaflet was, "What do you want?" But it was in like this, right? It's because Bengali has different there's different, what's the word, cases or styles. There's the more formal, there's informal, there's very informal. And so I think, what is it? Tumi ki chai. It's like a very casual, like the way you'll talk to your buddy. It was like, Tumi ki chai, what do you want? Like this very, it has this like modern feel to it, and just going straight to your heart. Little edgy, what do you want? Like that was the like the name of this leaflet. And then it was, discussing, different, modes of life, and calling souls to the path of devotion. Though he wrote Gurudev was a cool writer. There's also that very brilliant and humorous, witty article that he wrote, The Train Journey. Some of you have seen that. Chalar Pate, I believe is the Bengali, describing this conversation of these young brahmacharis on a train ride, and there are all these people on the train, and some of them are like making fun of them, and then there's this discussion that breaks out about the goal of life, and there's like all these different personalities being vividly described on the train. Like it just feels like you're there. It's so vivid, the writing, and also very witty, very humorous and clever. But anyhow, the advertisement that Lalita found for that Gurudev made for this Paramartha Dharma no, I can't remember exactly the words right now, but one of the thing that struck out at me was like even atheists, they will be very happy to read this book, and even atheists will be, it will be. I mean, it was. I wish I could remember. We can go back and find it. It was so brilliant the way it was phrased, but even atheists will be attracted to this, will be uplifted by this Paramartha Dharma. So please come and be uplifted like that. I can't remember how that started now. What was my thread? I lost my thread of thought again. But anyhow, that our Gurudev came and joined that was the main point. Joined at such a young age. I can't remember what my thread of thought was. I lost it. But anyway, our Gurudev showed this extraordinary example of surrender, coming from a very young age up until his last breath. Oh yeah, that's what I was saying. That even atheist, and that's also been my personal. So what Gurudev said about this book, Paramartha Dharma Nirnoy, it was also applicable to him, to his divine grace, that he was such a personality that even persons who were faithless, they, even if they didn't necessarily believe in what he was standing for, they were captured by his personality. They were captured by his level of authenticity, integrity, charm, and affection. He was such a commanding personality, but in the best sense, so sweetly commanding. He captured your heart, captured your attention. And he showed us the beauty and the dignity of what it means to surrender. What a happy and normal thing, what a wholesome thing it is. Not that you're losing out. Yesterday I was sharing something with one new guest here about our Gurudev, and I was saying that, in the presence of our Gurudev, like seeing the example of our Guru, he really made spiritual life something relevant, right? Because it was so palpable in him. It became tangible. More often than not, the mentality is like, I have there's the real world, right? I gotta pay the bills, I gotta work, there's this, there's that. And there's the stuff going on I got to take care of, right? And that's what's tangible, that's what's immediately relevant, that's what's in front of me. But in front of our Gurudev, we started to realize, oh, this is actually more relevant. Like, even though I can't quite see this and I can't quite touch this, this is more relevant. This is actually an immediate necessity. There's actually an urgency here, to dive into my spiritual life. And so because our Gurudev carried this so beautifully, with so much dignity, and also this level of urgency and immediacy, we were captured by that. Oh, I really need to give attention to this. Not just something I'm going to make some time for sometimes, but this is actually the center of everything, like for real, because he was living and breathing and walking and talking this divine truth that he stood for. It was really something quite extraordinary. Spiritual life wasn't something on the sidelines, but it came center front focus. in the presence of Srila Govinda Maharaj. And so day by day, there are so many of us that are carrying on just with his memory, remembering him and his divine presence and his divine wish, desire. And for many of us, that's what we're living for every day. That a member of that eternal world came here, and he spoke some words, told us a few things, and it was real, and that touched something somehow. It was able to penetrate layers of our existence and wake us up a little bit, say, oh, wow, this is some real stuff that's going on. And so he was here for some time, and he touched us and inspired us. And now he's gone on to his own eternal pastimes. But he left an impression. And so many of us are going on day by day, remembering that. And reminding us, oh, this is something real. So anyhow, that day of Guru Purnima is also a day to remember our Śrī Guru Dev and try to glorify him, remember something of who he was, and take more inspiration to continue and go deeper into what we are attempting to do. I think I'll stop there. Does anyone want to add anything? Gangalila.
Very small question. Is there, you talked about the discussion they had in Varanasi earlier, and is there a mott in Varanasi?
That's actually an interesting question. There is a Gaudiya mott, and in fact, it was a godbrother of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. I believe it was Jajavar Maharaj. He was sent, although I cannot exactly remember if it was in the time of Saraswati Thakur or after. But I believe it was during the time of Saraswati Thakur, but I'm not 100% sure. But somehow or other, Jajavar Maharaj was given this task of establishing, because Saraswati Thakur's mission, like the scope of his mission was so big, and so he wanted to have temples in all the major places of pilgrimage. He wanted to have a Gaudiya Math on every island of the 9 islands of Navadvip. He also had a vision of establishing 108 pada pits, these footprints of Mahaprabhu around India, marking all the places where Mahaprabhu went. And that actually is still an unfinished business. That's still, there were some that were marked in the time of Saraswati Thakur. And I know ISKCON is slowly continuing that mission, and perhaps others as well. So anyhow, the scope of Saraswati Thakur's mission was so big. So all of these major places, yes, there was a Gaudiya Math. Chennai, which was Madras at the time, right? Gaudiya Math. Kurukshetra, Gaudiya Math. Everywhere, Gaudiya Math. 64 Gaudiya Maths. So anyhow, there was this one godbrother of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, who I believe was Jajavar Maharaj, who had this task to establish a Gaudiya Math. However, and it is still standing today, at least one, and perhaps more, probably more. But Varanasi, it is known as being a headquarters for the impersonalist school, right? Mm-hmm. And we see that described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, right? In the time of Mahaprabhu, right? There's a whole group of them who are against Mahaprabhu. But Mahaprabhu, through his charm, sweetness, and intelligence, captures them, conquers them, and they're all converted to Mahaprabhu's line. However, it is the nature of the environment, right? The purity of the truth erodes, and the clouds gather again. So over. And actually, it's kind of interesting because many places where Mahaprabhu went, he's not really remembered, like in South India, for example. He traveled extensively in South India, but somehow he's not really known in South India. In Jagannath Puri, he's very known because he lived there for 24 years. Of course, in Bengal, it's all about Mahaprabhu. And in fact, and we were hearing this from Lalita Madhava also in our meeting, like like during like 1800s and earlier, most of the writing of the literary output of Bengal is centered around Mahaprabhu and Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So Bengal is all about Mahaprabhu is very central to the culture of Bengal, which is very beautiful. So of course everyone knows him there. But otherwise, somewhere or other around India, even places where Mahaprabhu went, he's not so widely known today. So anyhow, fast forward to the mission of Saraswati Thakur, early 1900s. Again, Varanasi is a stronghold of impersonalism, philosophical debate, logic, argument, all these things. Jajra Maharaj is trying to establish a Gaudiya Math there to fulfill the wish of his Guru Maharaj, but he's struggling. There are all these pundits, all these scholars who are ridiculing him and their teachings, and he can't gain any ground there. There's too many like respectable scholarly persons who are against him and the mission of Gaudiya Math. And so he was struggling a lot. So what does he do? He sends a message to Srila Sridhar Maharaj, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Daksha Sridhar Dev Goswami. Please come and help me. Please come and help me. And so Srila Sridhar Maharaj did that. He traveled there, and there were various meetings that were held with these prominent pundits, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj defeated them all, and they were happily defeated by him. And so because of that, the Gaudiya Math, gained recognition and respectability there, and they were able to establish the Gaudiya Math. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he was actually known for this. He was brilliant in presenting the teachings. And it wasn't only that he was, philosophically very knowledgeable. It wasn't only that he was, highly intelligent, but it was also that he had this a unique ability to connect with people. He knew he could recognize people's different mentalities, and he had an ability to speak to them. And I even heard from our Gurudev of one occasion when Saraswati Thakur himself was struggling in some discussion with some gentleman, wasn't able to convey his point across as he wished. The person was not receiving it. And Saraswati Thakur felt he wasn't able to convey it as he wished. And so he actually called for Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and he asked him to speak to this gentleman. And within 20, 30 minutes, that man was convinced by Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And Gurudev said it was, partly because, just because practically speaking, Srila Sridhar Maharaj had traveled all over India, and he'd been preaching in different roles. And so he had experience with a wide range of persons and experience with speaking to people of different mentalities. So that was one reason, and perhaps Saraswati Thakur, wasn't, exposed that much to all these different, this type of diverse spectrum of people in India at the time. But another point about Srila Sridhar Maharaj is that he simply had this presence, and we heard another story from Gurudev. This story, I'm sure many of you know, but they were in the Himalayas with Srila Sridhar Maharaj. Gurudev was running one of his tours. Srila Sridhar Maharaj was there on that occasion, as well as several of his godbrothers. At that time, there was this beautiful like interconnection that went on between the different branches of the Gaudiya Math. This is after Saraswati Thakur had left, right? And many of his disciples started their own missions, largely by the inspiration and direction of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. But they would all meet and come together. And so anyhow, there was this one pilgrimage going on. They're in the Himalayas. There's several of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's godbrothers present, as well as there was like a whole pilgrimage party. But on this one occasion, there was Srila Sridhar Maharaj was unwell. He was in his room, in bed with a high fever, and this one local pundit came. He'd heard about Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and he wanted to debate some points with him, but Srila Sridhar Maharaj wasn't well, and so instead, some of the godbrothers of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, they spoke with him instead. But he was unsatisfied. He wanted to debate this fundamental point about the existence of the Atma, like whether the soul really exists. And so this debate went on for some time. The Pandit was not satisfied. Meanwhile, Srila Sridhar Maharaj is laying in his bed, in his room. He's hearing it all going on. And then finally he like just couldn't take it anymore. And he like sits up slowly in bed and he like calls out in this weak voice, like, bring him here. And so Gurudev brought him in. And within like 20 minutes, Srila Sridhar Maharaj had convinced him. And there was one verse in particular, which I can't remember it. I can look it up. But essentially the verse is saying, it's a simple statement. Doesn't take a lot of brain power to understand or convey. It's simply saying, some people say the soul exists, some say it doesn't exist. This debate will continue eternally because those who have eyes to see can see, those who don't, they cannot see. This is essentially what the verse is saying. It's a simple point. And that scholar, he said, I know that verse. I've heard that verse many times. I know that verse. But the way that you have conveyed it to me, the presence in your words, in your emotion, in your expression, I can see the reality of what you're saying, that you're not just verbalizing the verse or speaking words, but you're actually living it. And I can see that potency within you. You're demonstrating the reality of what that verse is saying. And that is what convinced him. So, this was Srila Sridhar Maharaj, And so, yes, we can say, that Gaudiya Math was established in Varanasi, and that was largely by the intervention of Srila Sridhar Maharaj and the involvement of Srila Sridhar Maharaj that it was established. So, yeah, very, very nice question.
Thank you. It was so much more than just a straight answer.
You kind of tickled one of the points I wanted to talk about, so I guess I had a good excuse.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you all for your good company. I'm so happy we could share these topics. Wish you all wonderful day and evening ahead. Look forward to meeting next time. Jai Shri Gurudev Vancha Kalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Gurudev, Jai Shri Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai, Bhagavan Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai, Shri Guru Purnima Ki Jai, Sanatan Goswami Tirobhav Titi Ki Jai, Shri chaturmasya Ki Jai, Shri Krishna Dvaipai and Veda Vyas Ki Jai. All the assembled devotees Ki Jai, Shri Hari Sankirtan Ki Jai. Nitya Gaur Premanande. Hari Bol.
Shri Yukta Vishaka Devidasi ki
Jai.